Humankind has felt kinship with whales and dolphins for centuries, all the way back to the ancient Greeks, who recognized the striking similarities between humans and dolphins and believed that Apollo, the god of sun, would take the form of a dolphin while on Earth. And perhaps these tales of gods becoming dolphins led to our present-day fascination with these ancient relatives of ours beneath the waves. What we see as their smiling faces, their playful attitudes, and their fun-loving attitudes has made them a very popular choice when choosing an animal avatar or taking those online quizzes to tell you what kind of creature you most resemble. Because after all, who doesn't want to be the fun one? But the lives of the dolphins that we're seeing today and throughout the world are not always as carefree or as laid back as we think they are. And our actions, from changing their environment to holding them in captivity to disrupting their natural behavior, can have impacts on these distant relatives that we love to admire. Even though we might wish our lives were like dolphins, we remain the biggest threat to their survival. So it's no wonder that we feel so close and are so fascinated by dolphins, because we are the same. We're both mammals, we breathe air, we have hair, we're warm-blooded, we give birth to and nurse live young. We have similar skeletons, organs, brains, and hormones that dictate our moods and direct our emotions and our reactions. We have the same basic needs. We need air, food, shelter, and friends. And the biological similarities are not where the parallels stop. Just like us, whales and dolphins have unique cultures, they're long-lived, and they have complex social groups. They know who their friends are, who their family is, and who their rivals and enemies are. They think, they plan, they innovate, and they feel. There's a lot more going on underneath the water than just having fun. I work on orcas, and orcas are the largest species of dolphin and perhaps the most instantly recognizable type of whale or dolphin. The very well-studied resident orcas of the eastern North Pacific are one of just 5 mammal species known to go through menopause and have long and rich post-reproductive lives. Why do humans share this particular trait with orcas? Because our communities are defined by culture. These orcas have very close family bonds, and male and female offspring actually stay with their mother throughout their entire life. Just like in our multi-generational communities, the older adults play a very important role in the teaching and the care of the young. Grandmothers and older females who are helping to care for grandchildren while still having children of their own have less time and fewer resources to devote to caring for their entire family. So the grandmother hypothesis thinks that menopause exists so these matriarchs can focus on their extended family. And just like in our families, grandmothers have helped with childcare, birthday parties, and general spoiling of the grandkids. So anyone who's here with their grandmother today, take a minute to give them a hug. So those very close family bonds mean that when an individual is lost, that is felt deeply within the family. A recent story that captured hearts and headlines around the world is the tale of a southern resident orca, which is a critically endangered population, designated J35 and known as Tahlequah. Some of you might have seen in the news, she was reported carrying the body of her newborn daughter, who had died shortly after birth, for 17 days and over 1,000 miles. While Tahlequah is not the first, she has brought renewed attention to grief in whales and dolphins, but she is not the first orca mother in this particular population to lose a baby and experience its loss. In another example, about 8 years ago in 2010, an orca designated L72 was also seen carrying the body of her newborn daughter. Now, some have debated whether these actions were actually those of a grieving mother. After all, we don't know what emotions orcas actually feel or what thoughts occur inside their head. But studies of their brains have shown that they have an elaborate paralimbic region, which is a part of the brain associated with sensory processes and emotion. And orcas, it's much larger than in our brains. And orcas have increased amounts of spindle cells, which are associated with social organization and empathy. So how could we assume that we are the only ones to feel love, sadness, and emotional pain? Tahlequah interrupted her normal behaviors and actions, did not find food on her own or socialize with other orcas for 17 days while she devoted her time to carrying the body of her daughter and retrieving it each time it slipped and fell beneath the waves. She inspired people around the world to reach out and share their own similar stories of sadness and of loss, and that connection between orcas and humans was seen and felt very clearly with her display of grief. These emotions have been seen in other dolphin species as well, emphasizing the importance of social bonds and the impacts of loss. Most of the interactions have been between mothers and calves, but we've also seen adults mourning nieces and nephews, other close family members, and even close associates, what we would call friends. Just like us, whales and dolphins have very rich and complex social lives, and the dolphins we saw today off Cape May are one of the most well-studied species and populations that we know live in these fluid social groups that move around within their local community. Like the resident orcas, bottlenose dolphins typically live in female-oriented pods, so male and female offspring stay with their mother for extended periods of time, and daughters may stay in that family group for life, while sons usually leave to join bachelor pods. Male bottlenose dolphins can form very long-lasting partnerships that last for decades, possibly even their entire lives, like joining a fraternity that you never forget the secret handshake of. These partnerships usually consist of 2 or 3 males, and they may join with other groups temporarily for a boys' night out. And close friendships are reinforced through constant communication and through physical contact, swimming so closely together that they touch each other's flippers, or what we would say is holding hands. That extended time with the mom and the entire family means that the adults play an important role in teaching the younger members of the population. And in local communities, they're usually specialized for their specific area. Young members of the population learn everything about how to be a dolphin in their community from the older family members. They learn what to eat, how to get it, who their family is, who their friends are, where home is, and who to avoid from the older members of their family. And one of those most important life lessons to learn is food. The dolphins that we saw earlier were looking for fish. So as we've said, food is one of the most important life lessons that can be learned in any society, human or dolphin. For us, food is deeply connected to our family heritage, our history, and the regions that we call home. Food has, we have our favorite local restaurants, we have family recipes, and a lot of different traditions associated with food. And it's no different for dolphins. Communities local to specific areas will often have a favorite food as well as a special technique to get it. So for example, one of those techniques is the bottlenose dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia, which carry sponges on their noses to protect themselves from rocks, barbs, and other dangerous items on the ocean floor while they're looking for food. Young dolphins learn how to do this by foraging with their mothers, and it is part of the culture of the Shark Bay dolphins. In Florida, we see dolphins cooperating to create plumes of sand to trap and confuse fish. There's a population in Brazil that has partnered with local human fishermen to round up fish close to shore. And just down the way in South Carolina, there's a group that literally picnics on the beach with their strand feeding technique, where they force fish into shallow water very close to shore. The link between all these different techniques is that they are learned, passed down from mother to young. And in other species, we see adults actually taking the time to teach their young specific skills. Atlantic spotted dolphins have been seen pointing with their noses, prey towards calves while teaching them a specific method called crater feeding, and orcas in the southern hemisphere in the Crozet Islands will help their calves practice intentional stranding to go on beaches and snatch seals, and will even help their calves get back in the water if they get stuck. These adults are deliberately taking the time to make sure the younger generations has the life skills and the knowledge needed to survive. Orcas have to learn not only what's on the menu, but also how to get it from the older members of their family. Different populations of orcas actually have dietary specializations that are so culturally embedded it has led to the distinction of different ecotypes of orcas. They are so divided that they're like Red Sox fans versus Yankees fans. They might live in the same area, but they are fiercely loyal to their specific team, and they very rarely interact with each other. So just as our identities are formed by our communities and what we learn from our families, our experiences growing up, and the world around us, dolphins, including the different ecotypes of orcas and the distinctions between the coastal bottlenose dolphins here versus offshore ones that live further offshore, are developed from what they learn from their families and the cultural traditions that are passed down. Dolphins identify themselves and their families also through sound, not only through food, but through sound. So bottlenose dolphins, the ones we're seeing today, and at least 4 other species have signature whistles that they use to identify themselves, and they learn the whistles of others in their group. So just as we have names and we learn the names and voices of people in our social circles, dolphins rely on sound and identity to form partnerships, to recognize friends, family members, and allies, and to strengthen social bonds. Sound helps to create and maintain dolphin societies and communication. And just like the regional dialect up in Massachusetts, where WDC is based, the specific New Jersey accent that I have heard while I've been on my visit here, and then the lingo of the West Coast where I'm from, orca communities have very different ways of vocalizing and use different acoustics and have calls that are specific to each family group. You can tell where someone is from based on their accent, the specific words they use, or how they order a soda. And researchers can recognize the calls of specific orca families just based on hearing them. Learning what to eat, how to get it, and what language to speak are not the only things that link humans to dolphins. Humans also play, have fun, and find joy in the world around us, and dolphins sometimes do things that look like it's just for fun or for sheer joy. Perhaps, like in humans, play in dolphins helps them to practice skills, build muscle, develop cognitive functions, and strengthen social bonds. We often see dolphins bow riding on boats or surfing in their wake, or like the ones we saw earlier today, kind of surfing the top of the waves. This is a fun activity. We don't really know why they do it, and they actually put themselves at risk with this activity because they could be struck by the bow or propellers. Dolphins and whales will carry kelp or seaweed on their heads, fins, or tails. And just like in human kids, young dolphins seem to be more playful and curious than adults, jumping and splashing out of the water far more often, and maybe giving their adult family members a little bit of a headache with their rambunctious attitude. And just like in human society, dolphin communities pick up trends and fads that can come and go as quickly as they can in our popular culture. I'll give you some examples. So you might not see any man buns on dolphins or any handlebar mustaches, but they do come up with their own crazes. An individual bottlenose dolphin called Billy in Adelaide, Australia, learned how to walk on her tail during a brief stay in a dolphinarium for rehabilitation. And after she was released, she continued this behavior. She kept tail walking and was quickly copied by other individuals in her community. The southern resident orcas started the trend of wearing salmon hats, placing dead salmon on their heads for a very brief time in the 1980s. Now that trend went out of fashion pretty quickly, and tail walking in Australia is limited to just a select group of dolphins and looks like it's already fading out. So these trends and fads can come and go just as quickly as Tamagotchis or Beanie Babies in our societies. But one fad that has developed and stuck around is the beach rubbing behavior in northern resident orcas, which are a different population on the West Coast. This community has a very specific family activity where they visit certain beaches and rub their bodies on the smooth pebbles that are found there. We don't know what purpose this behavior serves or why it's only seen in this specific community, but it probably acts as a family bonding activity. It's a social night out, and it looks like they just really enjoy it. So the more we learn about whales and dolphins, these unique behaviors, the presence of culture, the social learning, and what we see as sadness and joy in their behavior, the stranger it becomes that we actually hold these individuals captive. These are all parallels to our own intelligence and our own lives, and that connection between humans and dolphins becomes more clear. So then we think about the families that we've seen and what happens when we take these whales and dolphins out of the water that they are so perfectly adapted to and put them into a captive setting where we control every aspect of their lives. Local communities are perfectly adapted to their specific environment and their family groups, like Tippy and her calf, who know where to go and where to come back each year to find this great food resource here off Cape May. Display of whales and dolphins began more than 100 years ago when we started taking them from the wild to hold in captivity. And we still don't know what the long-lasting impacts were on those communities that were most heavily targeted. It's not just about how many were taken, but also about who were taken. We've talked about the importance of elders and of mothers to the structure of their population. If an individual who was vital to their social structure or the survival of their group is removed, it could have long-lasting effects on the community that we don't even understand. For example, in the Exxon Valdez oil spill, a pod of Alaskan resident orcas lost their elder females and their social structure was completely upended. After the spill, their pod fractured and they are still recovering today. So public opposition here in the US has essentially ended the practice of wild capture and the import of whales and dolphins that have been caught from the wilds. But these activities still occur overseas. Orcas and belugas in Russian waters are still rounded up and sold to marine parks, and dolphins from the infamous Taiji dry ponds in other parts of the world are as well. We are still learning about the orca communities in the western North Pacific where this occurs, and just trying to understand the impacts that these captures have on the individuals there. And there's often not enough information about the local dolphin communities. We understand the dolphins here on Cape May pretty well, and we know their history, but in other areas, we don't know what kind of groups they live in or what the impacts captures have on those individuals that are left behind. So the more we find we have in common with whales and dolphins, the more we begin to question the ethics of captivity, and the harder it is to find excuses for continuing to hold them captive. When we take them out of the water and we put them in situations where we control what they eat and when they sleep, perform, play, and we control who they do this with, we're destroying those unique cultures and communities that we're just beginning to understand. They no longer need those specific feeding techniques that we talked about, and we control their social groups and who they spend time with, and we force them to perform tricks for our entertainment instead of leaping out of the water just for the joy of it. Even those captive-born individuals have come from wild lineages, and they may still have those distinct cultural traits that have persisted and have been passed down from mother to young. Wild traits that make whales and dolphins profoundly unsuited to life in a tank. So as we learn more about how much we have in common with them, we work to find alternatives to things like captivity and harassment. We make an effort not to disturb them or harass them in the wild by supporting the responsible dolphin watching, like the boat that we are on today at Cape May Whale Watch. And we work to find alternatives to life in a concrete tank, moving captive-held individuals out of captivity and into sea sanctuaries. And in sanctuaries, they can live as close to a normal life as possible, experiencing the waves and tides, chasing fish and finding food, feeling the natural ebb and flow of the ocean, listening to distant sounds. They can choose their own friends, they can avoid their rivals, and live on their own schedules, leaping for joy whenever the mood strikes. So instead of idealizing dolphins and wishing that our lives were more like these frisky, carefree ocean dwellers, we should recognize and embrace all the things that we already have in common with them. We are already so much the same, and that can lead into a respect for letting them live the lives the way they were meant to, wild and free, like the wonderful dolphins we're seeing here today. Thank you all.